Hello, my name is Amanda Lee Alonzo, and my project has been on mass incarceration within the United States of America. So, just an overview, mass incarceration is the dramatic increase in the rate of imprisoned persons within the United States. Currently, we have over 2.3 million Americans held in incarceration, whether in jails or in prisons. Our criminal justice system is inherently discriminatory and targets minorities, especially those who are impoverished. There's a highly disproportionate amount of Black and Brown Americans who are incarcerated when compared to white Americans. Additionally, our criminal justice system does not properly distribute justice to criminals or their victims. A study in 2020 found that over 70% of victims, or the survivors of violent crimes, preferred alternatives to jail like rehabilitation, community service, or counseling. The reason most provided was that they felt more safe knowing that their attacker would be changed, therefore preventing future crimes rather than just be imprisoned and then released back into the public. So, some current issues within our criminal justice system. As I've stated, there is a huge focus on punishment rather than rehabilitation within our prisons. Instead of fixing the issues that cause crime, like poverty, child abuse, or substance abuse, our criminal justice system likes to place people in prisons and then release them back into the public. Additionally, there is a huge sway on the financial status of the defendant. So when they go to trial, it has been proven that more people in poverty end up in prison when compared to those with money. This is due especially to the fact that those in poverty lack the financial resources to hire a personal defense attorney, rather than relying on the public defenders who have many cases on their hands. Also, there is a huge lack of mental care and public services within our prison system. This does not help people address the core issues within their lives like poverty or drug abuse. Overall, there are just not enough social programs available to help people, especially the people who are in prisons. So, some current solutions to crime that we have available in the United States. We have been using the tough on crime approach since the 1970s. This is exemplified especially by the 3 strikes laws and mandatory minimums, examples of the much harsher treatment and punishments that have been set into place. Also, cash bail is a huge issue, especially when it comes to the effect that a defendant's financial status has on the trial. So, the tough on crime approach is exemplified by 3 strikes laws. So, 3 strikes laws vastly increase the sentence of an individual upon their 3rd offense. While this might seem like a good idea at first to discourage repeated offenses, it is actually incredibly ineffective, and this targets mainly nonviolent offenders and drug addicts. This has been proved not to keep violent criminals away from the public, but it does serve to vastly increase the amount of people held in confinement and exacerbate the issue of mass incarceration. Mandatory minimum laws also add to the issue. So mandatory minimums are the minimum punishment enacted by Congress onto certain offenses. This means that judges are not permitted to give any lesser sentences than that by Congress. This does not allow the judge to take into account specific details of the case or any other factors when looking at the defendant. They cannot take into account mental issues, substance abuse, or any personal issues. This actually removes checks and balances within our court system because the judge is not deciding the sentence in the case. It's Congress who decides this. So, as I've mentioned previously, cash bail is a huge issue. It keeps impoverished defendants in jail prior to trial, and as seen in the chart, most people in prison are poor, and the poorest are women and people of color. As shown, the annual income of people in prison from before incarceration is much lower than the annual income of those who have not been incarcerated at all. This actually encourages plea bargaining, which is where the defendant will plead guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. Plea bargaining has been shown to increase the amount of people who falsely plead guilty as they're afraid of being found guilty anyway and receiving a harsher sentence. These are people with families, jobs, and homes, and many people do not want to risk losing a large piece of their lives. But plea bargaining and cash bail has lasting issues. Pleading guilty will give a person a criminal record, and with a criminal record, a person will find it much more difficult to find jobs, housing, and government assistance. So the proposal here is to eliminate 3 strikes laws, eliminate mandatory minimums, and eliminate cash bail. It is also incredibly necessary to create more social programs and focus on rehabilitation, all to achieve a goal of drastically decreasing the amount of people who are held in incarceration within the United States. Steps to be taken. First, it is incredibly necessary to gain political support for the changes in legislation. It has been shown in places like Washington, D.C. and New Jersey that getting rid of cash bail does not decrease the amount of people who show up for trial. Instead, both places take into account risk factors to decide whether or not to hold a person pre-trial. Most people who are released pre-trial end up showing to court anyway. Step 2 is to determine an alternate sentence. So instead of sending a person directly to jail, this would give a person a sentence of rehabilitation. This would entail counseling and maybe community service. Step 3 is actually to implement more community service programs. As seen in the picture, these are inmates who are fighting fires in California in 2019. So firefighting is one of the many community service options available. Step 4 is to implement more counseling and public service programs. As I've stated, there are many large factors like mental health, poverty, and substance abuse, which are huge factors when it comes to incarceration and criminal behavior as a whole. So benefits of this proposition would actually include in reaching the main goal. And following these steps, the amount of people who are held in incarceration is drastically reduced from our current numbers. As I'll remind you, our current numbers are 2.3 million Americans held in incarceration. Additionally, in ending the cash bail system, this would decrease the amount of people with unnecessary criminal records, as we are decreasing the amount of plea bargaining. We also decrease the amount of recidivism, which is the repeated occurrences of the same crime after being released from prison. Additionally, this plan actually encourages the growth of communities and finding solutions to social issues, rather than just having the temporary fix of prison. As I previously stated, there's a lot of research on this. Places like Washington, D.C. and New Jersey have eliminated the cash bail system and proved the effectiveness of risk factors. And as seen in the graph, each year there is a lot of money spent on the prison system. Jails and prisons alone spend over $80.7 billion just on prisons. And then the criminal justice system as a whole spends an annual total of $182 billion. It would be incredibly easy to just funnel some of this money into counseling and social service programs, which would in turn reinvest money into communities rather than just have it dumped into prison facilities. This would also increase the positive effects of inmates rather than having them just sit in prison. They would be able to have a positive impact upon their community. Here it is incredibly important to have an awareness of the lawful discrimination and social issues, like poverty, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and all others that lead to mass incarceration in the first place. Additionally, social programs would decrease the amount of crimes that take place, which would in turn decrease the amount of people who are incarcerated. Support of legislation changes like the ending of 3 strikes laws, mandatory minimums, and cash bail would all also decrease the amount of people who are unfairly incarcerated. And here are resources. Thank you.